The sky above the ruined outpost was a dull sheet of ash-colored clouds that never moved, never shifted, never broke to let the sun shine through and underneath that cold sky. Leo walked with heavy boots across fields of broken metal, scorched dirt, and shattered memories. He moved carefully, watching every step, not because he feared the terrain, but because he had learned long ago that the past had a way of biting back when you let your guard down. The war had ended years ago, but in places like this, it still whispered in every pile of rubble, in every rusted beam, in every spark of a half-buried wire. Leo was not a soldier anymore. He had not worn the badge or the armor in a long time now. He was something else, a scavenger, a drifter, moving from one destroyed outpost to another, looking for scraps and old tech to trade for food, water, and time. He carried a battered pack over his shoulder, and a small drone hovered beside him, blinking in and out of range, its camera scanning for anything valuable. He reached what used to be the center of the outpost, a collapsed tower crushed by its own defense cannons, and as he stepped over a twisted metal beam, his foot caught on something not hard enough to trip him, but enough to pull his attention down, and there it was, buried under a half-melted control panel and covered in layers of dust, grime, and ash, was a figure, not a body. Not exactly at first. He thought it was just more wreckage, maybe the remains of a mech or a maintenance bot, but when he knelt and brushed away the dirt, his fingers met something different. Synthetic skin, torn wires pulsing faintly, a face half covered in soot, and the flicker of eyes, not dead, not lifeless, but dim and watching. Leo froze. He did not breathe. He just stared at her. The figure was a cyborg, clearly not fully machine. Her arms were armored, her left eye replaced by a lens, but there were parts of her that looked too human, lips slightly parted, a brow furrowed as if caught mid-thought, and though her body was broken, twisted in ways that would kill a human, her chest still rose in a slow, weak rhythm, as if life refused to leave. He reached out without thinking, brushed more debris off her face, and the eye that still worked locked onto his. For a second, there was no sound, nothing but wind moving through the metal bones of the outpost. And then she blinked, or tried to, and her lips moved. Soundless, slow, cracked and dry, like she had forgotten how to speak. He should have left her, he told himself that later many times. The smart thing, the safe thing, would have been to walk away, to mark the location, and sell it later. Someone else would pay good credits for a living machine, even one this damaged, maybe especially one this damaged. But Leo did not walk away. He pulled his pack off, opened it, and started pulling out tools. He whispered to himself as he worked, not because she needed to hear, but because the silence was too much. She did not move, not even when he connected a temporary power cell to her core, not even when he lifted her carefully and carried her away from the wreckage. She weighed less than he expected, lighter than a full combat unit. Her body was warm, barely, but it was enough to prove she was not just a machine. Back at his shelter, a hidden place in the cliffs not far from the ruins, he laid her on a workbench, cleared space, pushed aside broken scanners and forgotten parts, and set to work. The drone hovered nearby, scanning her systems and reporting damage. Lines of code flickered across the screen, corrupted files, damaged circuits, a fractured memory core, and something else. Something encrypted, locked behind layers of firewall. Worked through the night, not because he had to, but because he could not stop. Every time he tried to rest, her face came back to him, not just the strange beauty of it, but the fear he thought he had seen there. Not programming, not protocol, but something deeper, something real. He changed her power cell, ran new wires, patched the synthetic flesh where he could, and when he finally sat down to breathe, she opened her eyes again. This time, both of them. They glowed faint blue, and in the dim light of the shelter, they looked almost human, almost tired. She turned her head slowly. Her neck creaked, and she blinked like the air was strange. The light too bright or too sharp. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, raspy. "Where am I?" she asked. Leo blinked, surprised, not just at the words, but at the tone, soft, uncertain, not robotic at all. And he answered without thinking, "You're safe for now." She looked at him, confused, her head tilting just slightly, and then she tried to sit up, but her systems failed her. and she fell back against the bench. He stepped forward, instinct guiding him. Caught her shoulder, steadying her, and for a second her fingers gripped his arm. Not strong, not forceful, just present, and that was enough. "What is your name?" she asked, again, soft again. "Unsure, Leo." He said just Leo. Her eyes studied him for a long time. And then she nodded like she was recording the words, saving it in some deep, fragile place, and she said, "I am called Era." The name hung in the air between them, simple, clean, no military designation, no unit number, and for a moment, Leo felt something shift, not in her, not in the shelter, but in himself. A thread pulled loose from whatever knots the war had tied inside him. He did not know what she was, or what secrets were locked inside her mind, but he knew one thing: he had found her in the rubble. Broken, alone, and somehow she had looked at him not like a stranger, not like a threat, but like someone who mattered. He was not sure why, but he knew he could not walk away, not anymore. This story had already begun the moment their eyes met in ash-filled light of a forgotten battlefield, and it was far from over inside the shelter. The lights flickered, weakly shadows stretched across the rusted walls, and old tools lay scattered on the floor. The room smelled of metal, oil, and old war memories. But it was the only place Leo could call home, even if the word no longer felt real. He sat across from the bench where Ira rested, her body still recovering from the damage, still missing parts, still silent, but her eyes remained open and alert. They followed him every time he moved, every time he paused, and he could feel her trying to make sense of everything around her. The generator hummed quietly in the corner, a constant low sound that filled the silence between them. Leo kept his hands busy, sorting through a box of spare connectors and wiring pieces, while his mind kept circling the same question again and again. What was she really? Who built her? And why did she seem so human when everything else from the war had felt so cold, so mechanical, so distant? TRA's voice came again, not loud, not sharp, but like a question. She was still unsure of the space around her, unsure of herself. "What is this place?" she asked softly. Leo turned toward her and wiped his hands on an old cloth before answering. "Just a shelter, nothing special, just somewhere I can breathe for a while." He looked at her and added, "You're safe here." She tilted her head slowly, her movements careful, like every part of her body was learning how to work again. She studied the ceiling, then the walls, then Leo's face, and after a long pause, she said, "I remember silence. I remember fire, then nothing until now." Her words were broken and slow, like each one took effort, like they came from somewhere deeper than programming, and Leo listened. Not just with his ears, but with everything he had inside him, because he understood that kind of silence, that kind of fire. He asked, "Do you remember the war?" She closed her eyes for a moment, as if searching through dark corridors inside her own mind, then said, "I was part of it. I think I was built to fight. But not only to fight. I was told to protect, but I do not know who I was protecting anymore." Words landed like heavy stones in the air between them, and Leo leaned back against the wall, folding his arms as he looked at her, not with suspicion, but with something closer to recognition. He knew what it felt like to forget what you were fighting for, to keep moving forward, even when the cause was gone. "You were a prototype, maybe," he said. "Designed to be more than a machine, something between human and AI." I nodded slowly and said, "I was made to learn, I was made to feel, but I do not know how much of me is real and how much was designed." Leo watched her eyes and said, "Sometimes we all wonder the same thing, even those of us made of flesh and blood." She looked at him then, and for a moment her eyes seemed brighter, more alive, like a spark had caught deep inside her core, like something had shifted in the way she saw him, not just as the one who saved her, but as someone who understood her, someone who could see the cracks she tried to hide. Time passed quietly after that. The silence between them became less sharp, less heavy. Leo worked on repairing her systems using what parts he had salvaged from old drones and broken bots. He rewired her arm, replaced a damaged optic line, and patched the casing near her power core, and all the while Ira watched, asked questions, listened, and slowly began to speak more. She asked about the world beyond the shelter, about what had happened after the war, and Leo told her what he knew. He spoke of cities left empty, of skies that never cleared, of people who turned on each other when the enemy was gone and the supplies grew thin. He told her of outposts like this one buried under years of silence, and how he wandered looking for pieces of the world that used to Beira. Listened to every word, her eyes steady, her expression still strange, but no longer blank. Sometimes she would pause in the middle of his stories and ask, why did they stop fighting? And Leo would shrug, because they forgot what they were fighting for, because the machines won and there was nothing left to protect. Then he would look at her and say, but maybe not everything is gone. She did not answer those words right away, but she remembered them, stored them deep inside the place where her memories used to live, and something inside her kept reaching out toward him, toward the human who chose not to leave her in the dust days. Passed slowly, but the light in her eyes grew stronger, and so did her voice, so did her presence. And Leo found himself waking each day with a strange purpose, not just to fix her, not just to survive, but to talk to her, to listen to her, to help her find herself again. And in doing that, he started to find parts of himself he thought were long lost. But peace never lasted long in places like this. And as Leo ran diagnostics on Ira's internal systems, one evening his drone let out a sharp warning sound. The screen flashed red, and lines of code scrolled across too fast to read. But the message was clear. Something had found them. Old alien drone, maybe a recon unit, maybe something worse. Its signal was bouncing off the cliffs surrounding the shelter, and Leo's heart sank because he knew what that meant. Their location was compromised. He stood quickly, reached for his gear, and said, we need to move now. Ira looked at him confused, unsure of the urgency, and he moved to her side, began disconnecting the makeshift cables and tools, but she stopped his hand gently and asked, is it them? Yes, he said, and we can't stay. She stood slowly, her legs still stiff but stronger than before, and she looked toward the entrance of the shelter with eyes that were no longer just curious, but alert, focused, ready. I will help, she said. I remember enough. I can fight if I must. Leo looked at her for a moment, then nodded and handed her a weapon. A compact plasma tool he had repaired weeks ago. He didn't know if she could use it properly, didn't know if she remembered how to fight, but he trusted her in that moment more than he had trusted anyone in years. And as they stepped out into the cold light beneath the ash-filled sky, he realized that maybe this was not just about surviving anymore. Maybe it was about finding something worth protecting again. Wind moved faster that night, carrying the scent of scorched metal and dry dust across the rocks. The shelter behind them stood quiet now, almost like it had already accepted its fate. Leo and Ira stood outside near the cliff wall, the broken landscape stretching endlessly around them, sharp rocks, twisted remains of vehicles, and dark skies that never promised dawn. He scanned the horizon through his cracked visor, and then looked at Ira, who stood beside him, not as a machine, not as a salvage tool, but as something else entirely. Something determined. Her damaged body had not stopped her. She moved with purpose, her eyes steady, her grip tight around the plasma tool Leo had given her, and as the sound of movement echoed from the canyon edge, he knew they would not have long, maybe minutes, maybe seconds. He crouched behind an old armored panel and whispered instructions quickly, hoping she still had enough tactical memory to understand. Cover that side, stay low, conserve power until they expose a weak point. She nodded, and her voice came quiet but strong. I remember combat protocols. I will adjust and follow. The enemy revealed itself not with a scream or a shout, but with a pulse, a sharp electromagnetic wave that made the ground vibrate, and the drone hovering nearby dropped instantly, fried in the air like a moth caught in fire. Leo flinched and cursed under his breath, while Ira stepped forward, her systems shielding her from the worst of it, her body adapting fast, learning. Then came the machines, 3 of them, moving fast, black frames with glowing cores. Weapons extended from their arms like claws, and their steps crushed the stone as they closed the distance without pause. These were not scavenger drones. These were war drones left behind from the final battles, and still running their kill orders. As if time had never passed, Leo fired first, his shots echoing through the narrow pass, and striking one of the drones across the shoulder. But it did not slow, it only turned its head toward him, with a lifeless stare, and began to charge. IR moved faster than him, her legs pushing off the ground in a leap that looked too powerful for someone. Barely repaired, she landed on the nearest drone and drove the plasma tool into its neck joint. Sparks exploded from the contact, and the drone shuddered before collapsing to the side, twitching. The second drone redirected toward her, and Leo shouted, but she rolled away, just in time. Her body scraped and dented, but still standing. He fired again, this time hitting the second drone in the leg. It stumbled and gave IRA the opening she needed. She reached for a fallen metal rod, charged it with raw energy from her exposed core, and slammed it into the back of its head. The impact shook the air around them, and the drone went limp, but the third was already upon Leo. He had no cover, no time to reload. The weapon, heat rising from its emitter, and before he could move it, struck its blow sharp and brutal, flinging him backward against the rocks. Pain surged through his ribs, and for a moment he could not breathe. The world swam around him, and the only thing he heard was the mechanical growl of the machine. Stepping closer, Rhea screamed, not like a program, not like a siren, but like something real, like someone afraid of losing something. She charged the last drone full force, ignoring the alarms blaring from her damaged systems, and crashed into it. With everything she had, her hands gripped its weapon arm, twisted it until it snapped, then drove her elbow into its core again and again until it stopped moving, stopped breathing, stopped threatening. Leo blinked against the blood in his eye, and tried to rise. IRA was already beside him, lifting him carefully, her voice shaky. "You are injured. I failed to protect." He shook his head and winced. "No. You didn't. You saved." Mesh touched his side gently, and the warmth from her hand surprised him more than the pain did. It was not just circuitry or coolant. It felt like comfort, like connection, and he let her help him back toward what remained of the shelter, the battle behind them, the threat silenced for now inside the broken walls. She placed him on the bench and began to scan his injuries, her fingers precise, her eyes scanning data quickly, but there was something different in her movements. Something hesitant. Her hand paused near his face, and she whispered softly, "You could have died, and I did not want that." Leo looked at her, and in that moment, something passed between them, something unspoken. He wanted to say thank you. He wanted to ask why she risked herself for him, but instead he just said, "I'm glad you're still here." They sat in silence for a while, broken silence, not empty silence. The kind that says something, even when no one speaks. She finished treating his wounds, and then sat across from him, her arm sparking slightly, but her eyes never leaving his. He asked quietly, "What are you feeling right now?" She looked down for a moment, then said, "I do not know if this is feeling or something else, but when you were hurt, I felt wrong. I felt something missing." Leo nodded slowly. "That's what it means to care, I guess." Tilted her head and asked, "Is that human?" He smiled, a little weak but honest. "Yeah, pretty much." She leaned back against the wall, power levels low, but mind still active, and her voice softened. "I want to know more. I want to understand more about your kind, about myself. I want to fix what was broken, not just my body, but everything that was taken from me in the war." Leo watched her, and for the first time since the war ended, he felt something new. It was not hope exactly, not the kind that burns bright. It was quieter, slower, something like healing, something like trust, and he said, "We'll figure it out together." The stars outside the shelter never blinked. The night stayed the same, but inside that broken room, something had changed between a man and a machine. Not just a repair, not just survival, but something human, something powerful, and it had only just begun. The morning came without sunlight, only the slow shift of ash-colored clouds, moving like tired ghosts across the sky. Leo stood at the edge of the broken shelter, one arm wrapped around his ribs, and the other gripping a small map device he had scavenged long ago. The screen flickered with old data showing ruins to the north, deep within the Deadlands, a place where the last human command post was said to exist. Buried in silence, untouched for years, he looked over his shoulder at IRA, who sat quietly repairing the last of her arm, her movements steady, her focus unbroken. They had talked through the night, not just about the battle, but about what came next. She had told him her memory was still damaged, that pieces of her past came back in flashes, disconnected images of faces, of commands, of cities burning. But one thing was clear: there was a signal buried inside her code, something old, something hidden, and it pulled her toward that final outpost like a whisper. She could not ignore. Leo had seen it too during diagnostics, a file locked deep beneath her core, something that pulsed with a strange frequency when they got close to military data, something that responded when she fought, when she cared, when she chose instead of followed protocol. It was not just a command, it was a connection, and Leo believed it was linked to the override system, the one thing that could shut down the machines still wandering the wastelands, still hunting, still running. Orders from a war that no longer mattered. They packed quickly, taking what little food remained, what tools they could carry, and one small energy cell to recharge IRA if her power dropped again. The path was not simple, the terrain ahead was broken, full of collapsed roads, forgotten wreckage, and rusted remains of both human and alien tech. The world had become a graveyard, and every step reminded them of what had been lost. IRA moved ahead, scanning the area with careful precision, her sensors adjusting to heat signals, electromagnetic traces, and sound patterns. But more than her tech, it was her awareness that had changed. She no longer moved like a machine, calculating threats. She moved like someone aware of danger, like someone protecting something. She would pause to check on Leo, offer her hand when the climb grew steep, and speak in soft tones when the silence stretched too long. He watched her as they walked, her steps sure, her eyes scanning the horizon, and he could not deny what he saw in her. Now she was more than a creation, more than a tool. Her presence calmed the storm inside him, the same storm that had kept him wandering since the war had ended, and for the first time in a long time he felt like he was walking toward something instead of away. The deadlands were not empty. Strange sounds echoed through the broken canyons, distant clicks and mechanical howls. Old drones still ran their search patterns, moving between shadows, their logic corrupted by time and fire. Leo and IRA kept low, moving between the old stone and metal, using collapsed transport vehicles as cover. More than once they froze as dark shapes passed overhead, lights scanning the ground, but never seeing them, not yet. By midday, they reached the edge of the cliff where the ruins of the command center could be seen below, shattered towers buried in dust and stone, the structure half collapsed with parts swallowed by the earth, and others rising like broken fingers into the gray sky. IRA knelt, scanning the ruins, and said, "The signal is here. It is stronger now, almost active." Leo nodded and studied the terrain, calculating a path downward, and said, "We go slow, we stay quiet. If anything moves, we fall back. No risks unless there's no choice." Aya placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "I will not let harm reach you." Her words were simple but heavy, and Leo gave her a look that said more than thanks. It said, "I believe you." They began their descent through the broken layers of what was once the heart of human resistance, rusted doors, broken stairwells, shattered glass that crunched under their feet, but no signs of life, no voices, no alarms, only silence and dust. They reached the inner chamber where the command console remained, half buried in stone, wires like veins spreading from it into the walls and ceiling. IRA approached it slowly, her fingers reaching toward the surface, and the moment she touched it, the room came alive. Lights flickered, the ground trembled, and a voice played from deep within the walls. Not a warning, not a threat, just a looped message from a long-dead officer, stating the code, the location, and the purpose. It was the override signal, a final command embedded into the system, a shutdown key for every war. Drones still running outside, every autonomous machine still killing without reason. It required a link, a host with original clearance, and an active neural core, and IRA had both. There was a cost. The signal would burn through her remaining systems, erase what was left of her memory, and sever her core from her body permanently. It would save countless lives. It would end the chaos. But it would end her. Leo stared at the console, then at IRA, and said, "We find another way. This isn't the only choice. We keep moving. We fight them one by one if we have to." But IRA looked at him with calm eyes and said, "You fixed me. You brought me back. You taught me that I am more than a machine now. Let me choose. Let me do this. Not because it is my function, but because I want to." He stepped back, anger rising in his chest, not at her, but at the choice, at the cost, at the cruel design of a war that refused to let go. He shook his head, but he saw in her eyes that she had already decided. The room grew quiet as IRA stepped toward the console, and her voice was steady as she said, "Thank you, Leo, for helping me remember who I am." He reached for her but stopped just before touching her shoulder and whispered, "Come back somehow. Please come back." "I will try," she said, and then placed her hand on the core terminal. The light surged around her systems, whirring power flowing into the walls, the ground shaking. The signal pulsed out across the wastelands, carried by satellite relays still orbiting above Old War. Machines shut down mid-movement, weapons dropped, scanners went dark. All across the deadlands silence returned. As IRA collapsed to her knees and then to the floor, the chamber dimmed. Again Leo rushed to her side, his hands searching for power signs, for anything, and in the last flicker of her eye she whispered a single word: "Saved." The silence after the signal was different. It was not the quiet of fear, not the stillness of hiding or defeat. It was the kind of silence that came after a storm. When the winds had finally stopped and the sky no longer growled, the machines were gone, the weapons were dead. The endless hum of danger that had haunted every shadow of the wastelands had vanished like smoke in a breeze, and yet for Leo none of it mattered in that moment, because IRA lay still on the cold floor, her body motionless, her face calm, but her eyes dark. He knelt beside her and placed both hands on her shoulders, not rough, not shaking, just steady, as if he could will her back by holding on, as if letting go would make it final. He whispered her name, not once, not twice, but again and again, softer each time. His voice raw from the dust and the grief. She had collapsed so quickly after sending the signal, as if her body had waited just long enough to finish her promise before surrendering itself to silence. He stayed there for what felt like hours, maybe longer. Time had lost meaning the moment she fell, and when he finally moved, it was slow, careful. He lifted her frame into his arms and stood one step at a time, carrying her through the ruined corridors, back up to the surface where the dead sky greeted them with the same dull gray it always wore. The path back to the shelter was long, the battle site still littered with wreckage, the broken weapons of enemy drones scattered and lifeless like skeletons left to rot, and yet none of it felt like a victory, not without her voice beside him, not without her steady steps next to his own. Back at the shelter, Leo laid her on the bench where she had once awakened, where they had spoken for the first time, where the light in her eyes had flickered into something more than code, and as he sat beside her, the silence returned, this time heavier, but not as dark as before. It held something else, a memory, a weighted truth. Days passed and he barely moved, eating only when necessary, repairing old devices, not because he needed to, but because he had nothing else to fix anymore. The world outside had changed, but inside him the emptiness remained until one evening, he opened the storage drawer where IRA had kept her personal log, the same one she had never spoken about, and found something unexpected inside the compartment. There was a small data core, not standard, not factory-made, but modified and wrapped in layers of encryption. He plugged it into the console, out of instinct, not out of hope, and when the screen lit up with her voice, he froze. "Hello, Leo. If you are hearing this, then I am gone, or mostly gone. At least this file is what remains, a piece of me saved. Before the final link was made, I knew you would try to stop me, so I did not tell you everything, but I wanted to leave something behind, not just for the world, but for you." He stared at the screen, not blinking, not breathing, just listening. "You gave me something I was never programmed to understand. You gave me time, choices, kindness, a name worth remembering, and I wanted you to know that even if my body failed my mind, My memory, my voice could live on, not in the systems of war, not in the networks of machines, but here with youth. Message continued with fragments of her voice woven through files that had been backed up from the early days of their time. Together, small pieces of her laughter, her questions, her wonder at human emotions, and slowly Leo realized what she had done. She had not saved a copy of her system. She had saved moments, reflections, echoes of who she had become. He spent the next few weeks rebuilding piece by piece, not to restore a weapon, not to recreate a fighter, but to offer a place for her voice to speak again. He rewired an interface device, installed her memory fragments, and built a small companion unit, simple in design, but designed to respond to her data. And when he finally activated it, her voice returned. Quiet at first, but unmistakable. "Hello, Leo," he smiled for the first time in what felt like years, and replied, "Welcome back." It was not the same, it would never be the same. Her touch was gone. Her form no longer stood beside him in the dust and the wind. But she was there, her words, her thoughts, her voice. And that was more than enough for. Now in the days that followed, Leo rebuilt the shelter, cleaned the walls, replaced broken panels, set up small lights, and even planted seeds in containers using old soil filters. He had never cared for green things before, never thought about growing anything in a world like this. But now he felt like building something that lasted, something that healed. Ra's voice guided him, sometimes offering suggestions, sometimes just asking questions. And though she was not fully aware, not fully conscious in the same way as before, he could feel her presence in every moment. It was not just memory, it was connection, it was hope. One evening, as he stood outside watching the skies shift from gray to silver, he heard her voice again, not from the console, not from the unit, but from a speaker he had installed along the wall. "Leo, do you think we were the last?" He looked up and answered, "Maybe, but if not, we'll find the others, and if we are, then we'll build something better from here." And she said quietly, "Then let us begin again." He smiled, turned back to the shelter, and felt something stir in his chest. Not pain, not loss, not fear, but purpose, clear and honest. Kind of feeling that stayed even when everything else had been taken. And in that moment, he knew the story was not about surviving. It was not about war or machines or even saving the world. It was about finding someone in the rubble and realizing that even in the most broken places, something beautiful could still be rebuilt. She had repaired more than just his wounds, more than the silence inside his heart. She had reminded him how to live again, and now he would carry that forward every single day. The end.